Sam, if you ever do a podcast, it should be called Table Talk.
You guys have a pretty similar beard, man. I would say of the men in this church, you and Sam probably have the closest beards to each other.
True.
Oh, burn. You maybe need to get him some man beard quality products.
Theoretically, no. No, guys, I take care of my beard.
Yeah, you take care
Theoretically. Theoretically.
Are you though?
Ready for what?
Good evening. Welcome back to our Men's Forge Group. Pastor John Lafreniere, assistant pastor here at Meriden Hills Baptist Church, is joining me. John, we are discussing the book by John C. Maxwell, The 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership. And John C. Maxwell, as you know, was a former pastor.
Right.
He believed his calling was to exit the ministry and instead have a ministry, you could say, to leaders, both pastors and business, men and women.
Right.
I think many refer to him as the pastor of leaders.
Leadership guru.
Yeah, okay, sure. I've never heard that phrase, but yes. And so his books definitely do include scriptural, biblical truth. I wouldn't say there's verses on every chapter, every page. There are not.
Right.
He does allude to the Bible many places. His books are by no means written to purely a Christian audience, but neither are they. Is there anything in his books that are against the Bible?
Correct.
So what we're doing in this group is looking at the truths in this book and then looking at the Bible as well. Because as pastors in a church setting, we, of course, care more about the Bible than we do about John C. Maxwell, although he does bring up some good points. We'll discuss both. Right. Okay, so as far as the book goes, we are talking about the law of addition. Now, in the 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership, that's chapter 5, the law of addition, which basically states that the leader's job isn't to ask, what can the people I lead do for me, but instead, how can I add value to them?
Right. And I think it's important when we're talking about the law of addition to realize that you can't just you can't call leadership what some people call management. I think there's a difference between management and leadership.
Well, I agree with you. Why don't you, since you started that, go ahead and continue.
I think management has less of a relationship component to it. I think you can manage a whole bunch of things that aren't even human, okay? But leadership, you have to deal with relationships. You have to forge relationships. You have to protect relationships. You have to strive to even make relationships thrive that, go according to what your mission is.
Can it be said that someone, man or woman, is a good manager but a poor leader?
All the time. I mean, and these people, I think you say that's maybe the difference of maybe lower level management where they're more concerned with the numbers and what needs to get done to please the actual leaders who are driving the company or driving the mission. And so leadership is more mission-based. Management can be more minutia-based, I guess, if you want to put that thought.
Interesting. So a manager is looking at the output. What is the group completing?
Right.
And if you're not successful, throw you out, replace you with someone else because I've got a job to manage. I've got a job site to manage. Whereas a leader is people focused. And it's not that the leader wouldn't also fire someone. That may have to happen. But the leader may be not as quick to fire someone.
Because there's a relationship built there. And this is for the law of addition, that yes, we do work for the to help people and to further them along. So there's a natural relationship component. As opposed to management, it's all about the bottom line and whether or not the job's getting done. And if it's not getting done, then we need to switch things for the productivity's sake.
John, as you're speaking, I am thinking about relationships in the home, a husband and wife. A husband that's a good manager, manages the house finances, they have a car, they have animals, a house, they live in a great neighborhood. The man can manage a family. Kids are in control, towing the line.
Yes.
But is he a leader of the family?
Right, and sometimes those things get kind of muddy because you think, well, he's doing all the things that look like from the outside, leadership is happening.
Right.
But you can do all the things you mentioned, manage everything, make sure everybody's fed, make sure people are getting what they need as far as the finances to succeed, and still have very little relationship. And as you go into, for example, the southern part of our state in Fairfield County, you'll find a lot of people that have all the finances and means to manage their family. But Because
literally hiring a nanny,
right,
hiring a cook,
right,
hiring a cleaner to manage the house.
Right, but they're actually hiring people that develop relationships with their family.
Interesting.
And how sad is that?
And how many of these men and women, I wonder, are living on the brink of suicide, depression, discouragement, because in spite of the face value of the well-managed family, there's no real joy because there's no real relationship.
Right. And so we got to be careful, even in a church setting, to realize that as ministry leaders, we're not just managing things.
Yes, that's a great point, John.
Because you can
Let's
use...
bring it home, right? Let's
right,
bring it to the
right.
pastors.
Because we can use programs and things out of a box to manage the situation.
Yeah.
But, you know, if you're not developing leaders yourself, and by the way, that's one of the keys to addition, is that your leadership style does, in effect, add other leaders to the world.
Yeah, and John C. Maxwell actually talks about the law of multiplication as far as
right.
repeating yourself in leaders.
But they all kind of work together.
No, definitely, because as you add value to someone, which is what this chapter is dealing with, as you add value, the goal eventually would be for this person's value to increase where they themselves can turn and do it to someone else, essentially be a leader.
Right.
And so by adding value, by lifting them up, by increasing, you might say, even their self-confidence, not in a prideful way,
right.
but in a helpful, encouraging, practical, biblical way,
right.
where you're lifting each other up, you would hope that that person would do the same for someone else.
Right, and that's the goal. And that was the goal of Christ in making disciples, leaders, who would go on and create more leaders, and here we are today, right?
I see you have your book, Bible open in the same chapter I do, Matthew chapter 20, verse 26. Why don't you read that for us,
right.
26 through 28, which, of course, is the text that I think fits very well with this chapter.
But it shall not be to so among you, but whoever will be great among you, let him be your minister. Verse 27, and whosoever will be chief among you, let him be your servant. Even as the Son of Man came not to minister unto, but to minister and to give his life a ransom for many.
To give. So there it is, that idea of adding value. I mean,
right.
Christ added the greatest value.
For sure.
He added eternal value
right.
to everyone who accepts him by faith. We can't even come close to adding the kind of value that Christ adds to us. But that doesn't mean we can't add value. Christ commands us to, in that very text, to follow his example, to minister, to serve, to give to others, to add to them, not to take from them.
Right. And you look at the great contrast that Christ makes in Mark, where the thief cometh not but for to steal, kill, and destroy, but I am come that they might have life and might have it more abundantly, right? So he gives us the value that we probably can't even fathom ourselves, because it's abundant life. But at the same time, we have a situation where we have to be really watching out for ourselves. Are we truly ministering? Because we can do the job of making people comfortable, but is that ministry? And sometimes ministry is uncomfortable.
That's a great point, John. I think that a lot of young men and women both, they think that leadership, and John Maxwell refers to this, leadership is in some way climbing the ladder, getting to the top, getting more prestige, getting more honor. But leadership is essentially more responsibility, and not more responsibility of time clocks and money. It includes those things, but even the lowest tier worker still has to worry about time clocks and money.
Manage.
The higher level of leadership, it's more responsibility of people's lives, John.
Right.
Even in the workplace, you're dealing with people's lives. People's lives are affected by how you lead, secular workplace, church, both.
Mm-hmm. And there it is. There's the internal impact that leadership can have, and especially in a church-type atmosphere. And churches that aren't under good leadership, where there's not a conscious effort of addition, like John C. Maxwell points out, is going to be a church where either they themselves become the only one that can do things in the church, or they have a church where people just don't respect what's going on there. And a lot of the fact that's going on, I think.
You know, John, Maxwell states in his book, he has a great quote, I want to read this. Inexperienced leaders are quick to lead before knowing anything about the people they intend to lead.
Right.
But mature leaders listen, learn, and then lead.
That's fantastic.
What's the value of a mature leader listening to those they're leading, learning, then leading? Because it's hard to add value when you don't know what they're already lacking or needing, or what they already have. It could be you're adding value where value is already there. They don't need it.
Correct.
It could be you're adding value in the wrong place. It could be you're adding value in something they actually don't deserve value to be. You did a great job that everyone's looking around saying, this person messed up. It was a dumpster fire.
Right.
Why would you say they're doing a great job? You're, as a leader, trying to add value, but you're doing it not honestly. And then when people perceive you're a dishonest leader, they won't believe anything you say, and then your ability to add value diminishes.
Correct.
But when you point out, I saw what you did a great job, people then recognize that the value you're adding is honest.
Right.
They'll receive it more.
Right. And the value of listening in leadership is so key, because if you don't, you do end up being what people would consider somebody who does not value things that ought to be valued. Now, listening, I mean, you know, the old adage is God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, because he wants us to listen probably twice as much. And as leaders, if we don't listen, then we are showing pride and arrogance. And I think that goes into our study on humility, where it gets hard to follow somebody who is arrogant and pride-filled unless you are the same way.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So
well, even verse 27 of Matthew chapter 20 says, and whosoever will be chief among you, let him be your servant. It implies if you want the position, you can't have the pride that the world generally matches to the position.
Right.
You got to have humility. If you want to be a spiritual leader, not just a leader, a spiritual leader, humility must be attached. You cannot allow your pride to grow with the level of leadership been given to you. It's almost opposite.
Right.
That the lower your pride goes, the higher your leadership will climb.
Right. And in a real sense, I mean, it's all about relationship building. Listening builds relationships. That's the key. It's a give and take, right? And when you're listening, then you're able to draw from the ideas and the skills of people around you and help the whole mission together, be able to go forward. And that's something that you find in great leaders, is they are surrounding themselves with other great leaders.
I agree with that.
But definitely. The reason they're doing that is because they're listening and recognizing that person is a great leader. I want to surround myself with them.
You know, as a leader, I have no problem following other leaders if I can respect them, and if I believe that respect is mutual. Then, yeah, why wouldn't I want to follow another leader?
Right. And I think that's the way it is with most people. The problem is finding that leader.
Right, that will listen.
is very difficult, because most of the time leaders have this persona where, you know, they've got to the top just being who they are. But leadership is about building relationships, and a lack of building relationships, you talk about climbing the corporate ladder. Well, somebody once said, you know, yes, there is a corporate ladder, but the way you get to the top is climbing on people's heads.
Yes.
And that is exactly stepping on people's heads. And I have met people that are very successful in the corporate world who have looked at me and said, I don't have any friends. All the friends that I have, I either use or have used me. And I'm alone at the top. And that's okay, because I'm a leader.
And you're okay with that?
No, you're not a leader.
Yeah, wow.
You're a manipulator, and perhaps you're even more an opportunist.
So the opposite is true in Scripture. Instead of climbing on the top of people's heads to be on top, you are instead trying to get alongside of people and serve and minister them at their level. Again, adding value to them. And let's kind of clarify this idea of adding value. So this ambiguous, touchy-feely, fluffy phrase.
Right.
So when I think of adding value, I think of what does someone truly need to be successful, and you are adding to them what they need to move forward. Now, me as a pastor, I'm going to be asking, their biggest success is spiritual.
Right.
What can I add to someone so that they can find spiritual success? Now, in the corporate world, I would imagine the question would be, what value can I add to my employees so that we can all move together successfully, and then the whole company wins? On a marriage level, what value can I add to my spouse so that my spouse can be in a good place of mental health and be the wife or husband they need to be? To the kids, what value can I add to my kids so that they can be independent? I mean, there's different reasons, right? But essentially, success. Adding value to someone so they can find and seek and attain success.
Right, and for many of the great leaders, it's simply just paying it forward, because very few people become a leader of themselves.
Someone else invested in them.
Most times people invested in them tremendously to be where they are.
Yeah.
And there's the thing about family. If you have a good idea and a good portrayal of leadership from a father, then maybe you have a better a chance that that son becomes a good father because of the leadership is passed on,
so
right?
Essentially, this chapter of adding value is just basically investment.
It is.
Invest in people.
Right.
Fathers, invest in your children.
Right.
Spouses, invest in your husband or wife. Pastors, invest in
people.
Parishioners.
Right.
And Christians, invest in each other.
Right. And there we go. This is Christ's principle that he laid out for the whole church in a whole. He wanted his disciples to go. He invested in them so they can go invest in others, who invested in others.
Which is what he's at the end of the Gospels, John.
That's it.
And that's what you're referring to. Is
right.
At the end of the Gospels, it is stated to the apostles to do what? To go out and to make disciples,
right.
teaching them, and baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy
right.
Spirit, and investing in them as Christ invested in the apostles.
Right. And there's the Great Commission. And I feel that there has been looked at, even in the corporate world, a dearth of great leadership. And so they're going to, things like servant leadership and things that would be considered biblical principles because they have tried their best to and hit a wall doing it to try to produce leaders that keep on changing because they're just not strong leaders. And so this idea of addition is becoming more of an idea in the corporate world, and they're pouring more and more into people and into their relationships. And whereas you might have found different seminars and things that were about pushing to the top and about doing the manipulating and the climbing that was used to be done, now we're getting more into the, and for them, touchy-feely of wondering about people's emotions.
So that is the problem. There's a danger.
There's a huge danger in this.
There's a danger of adding value where all you're doing as a leader
is
basically
fluff.
The company and the company's need for success is pushed to the wayside. What does my employee need?
Right.
And that can, there's some really needy people out
there. There are.
Where they could suck the life out of a company or a workspace. I'm sure there are people listening right now that are in a company like that, where the one person is getting all the attention, all the value, and everyone else has to suck it up because that one person takes it all.
Right. And there it is. That's what happens a lot of times in the world's attempt to try to add value. It becomes very shallow at the very end because there really is no value outside of Jesus Christ.
No eternal value for sure.
No eternal value, but even on this earth, because there's just, I think when you actually attach value, there has to be some sort of truth behind value to make it truly valuable.
Well, I agree with you. Remember, value is basically helping someone find success. It's not just patting them on the back so they feel better about themselves for that day.
Right.
That's not real value.
Nope.
That's just holding. It's almost like someone getting drunk to forget about for the present. It doesn't fix the future. You just forget about the present. Patting someone on the back and saying you're going to be okay is just a temporary Band-Aid to forget for a moment the pain. Adding value allows someone to overcome the pain and move forward.
Very good.
But in corporate, secular companies, I don't see that happening. I think it's mostly the touchy-feely, everyone be nice, use terms that are not offensive so everyone can feel good about each other. But that doesn't really help people find success.
Right, and we often, we kind of expect that in the corporate world, but what concerns me is what's happened in the church house.
Yes.
When we are doing the touchy-feely, when we are just hitting on the things that everybody wants to hear and aren't teaching the whole counsel of God and stay away from the hot-button issues with all we can because we don't want to offend anybody.
You're right. Adding value isn't always doesn't always feel good.
No.
A lot of people have added value into my life, and it was hard.
Right.
It hurt me.
Challenged us.
Sure. Challenged and challenging can be hurtful.
Right. Yeah.
And it was hurtful to have my value increased, but it was necessary. And the people who did it that I could think of loved me and had the right intentions, and they truly wanted me to find success, but it wasn't always a pleasant experience.
Right, and if you look at the example of the agate, the stone that's so valuable once it goes through the tumbling process, it's rough. It needs to be tumbled. It needs to be gone through that process to actually have the value that it has one day. Same thing with any kind of precious metal. Got to be boiled, got to be melted, got to get the dross off. I mean, you think of this type of scenario in the scientific world, and then you look at people, and people, they do have rough edges, and God has to take that chisel.
God talks about refinement in the Old Testament.
Right.
Yeah,
has to take that chisel and has to, chisel things down so that we can be the masterpiece he is trying to make in us. And there is the value. And that's what we as leaders sometimes have to do, and the people that are with us, is to help with those rough edges and maybe even help those with those blind spots that are in people's lives. But these are all challenges that do add value once things are overcome and seen, to make those people.
And you're right, John. So God is doing that for us. Whether anyone else does that or not, God is increasing value in us through the process called sanctification.
Right. No
Sanctification is a large word that's not as used as commonly as it once was. It essentially means the Christian is becoming more like Christ as time goes on.
Right.
And so as we become more like Christ, it's because, not our own efforts, but God's work in our hearts, and the only part we have is our responsive, submissive yes to the work that he's doing in our lives. So God is adding value to us. But then, you know what's great about God? God doesn't need you and me to add value to others. He can do everything.
He could.
But he wants.
He chooses to.
He wants to use you.
Right.
He wants to use me. He wants to use those in this room to add value to others.
Mm-hmm.
And so question, John, is how hard is it for a leader to get to that point where they recognize leadership is not about what you can do for me, but what can I do for you?
How hard is it? Well, I think it's a perspective change, because most people want to become leaders, so people listen to them. Very few people want to become leaders so they can listen to others. But that's the key. And so it is hard, but it's hard because it has to become a purposeful mentality shift of what truly leadership is.
Yeah.
And it's not about people listening to you. It's about you listening to others so that you can make the best decision possible, so that people can actually succeed.
Amen, John. That's great, man. So same truth, of course, can apply to the family.
Oh, all
Being
of
a
them,
dad is not about having kids who listen to you.
Right.
Being a dad is about having kids that you can listen to.
Right.
Getting married.
Yep.
It's not about having a wife who does your every bidding and listens to your every need. But getting married is about having a wife who you can listen to and assist her.
And find fulfillment and find value and find success, because now you're walking hand in hand, side by side, down the road of life, and you're doing it successfully because you're able to pour into each other equally. And there it is. So when it comes down to it, those who are seeking to be above people in leadership really find best leadership is working side by side people who together you can bring things to another level.
It takes a lot of humility.
Right.
It also takes a lot of patience.
Yes.
Because the truth is about adding value to people, John. We're going to end it with this kind of thought. That I think there are a lot of good intentioned leaders. They truly do want to add value to others. And they make so many sacrifices to add value to someone who just won't get it. They pour into this person years, financial, emotional, relational, right? And that person churns their back and walks the other way. How heartbreaking for a leader who has no other desire but to add value, and the person just refuses to accept it. Right,
and they're at the very end of that question is, well, how much of a relationship did you build with that person?
I mean, I get what you're saying, but it's Christ the same way. Christ invests in us, and we turn our backs on him.
Right.
And you can have a solid relationship. People can still say no to you.
Right, but even in Christ's example, when we turn our back on him, he still tries and does his best to continue that relationship and continue to seek after us and does not ever give up. And when we come back to him, he is very much receiving.
I agree. My point is, for those listening that say, that's what I want to do. I want to be a leader and add value. It doesn't always play out with a happy ending.
No, it doesn't, because the same shift in humility that leader had to take to want to pour into other people is not so easily done in everybody. There is a pride, and that pride keeps people from being the best leader that they can be.
Right, so my shift to be humble enough to serve others doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be humble enough, first of all, to receive the service.
Right.
Second of all, to return it to someone else.
Right.
So they take it all and don't return it anywhere else.
So look at the scriptures here in the parable of the prodigal son, which really was the older brother, right?
You could say that. I get what you're saying.
Okay, but yes, that happened to him. He was a good father. There was no doubt in that story that he wasn't a good, perfect father in a way. And that one went away and did his, spent his living and did whatever he wanted. That older one never left positionally, but he was just as prodigal as the younger brother and never came back from what we know.
So my point is, those
Right,
who are called to a leadership position of investing in others and adding to others also need to accept the inevitability.
Right, that there will be some
that there's heartbreak.
Right, there will be some. And here's the thing. Don't stop leading. Don't stop caring about people. Don't stop pouring into people when you have people in your past that don't really turn out the way you are desiring them to.
Yeah.
Because that's what some leaders, there's where some leaders lose and lose it big, is when they just said, well, I'm not going to do that again.
Yeah,
that was a waste of time.
Yeah, waste of time, waste of effort, waste of investment. Why would I do that again?
And the sad thing is...
And they just turn into managers at that point.
They do. And the sad thing is, while you put all your hopes and dreams in that one that went astray, good thing that there was other people watching and getting some lessons that you might not have poured into as directly.
Amen to that.
But they're paying attention, and they might be the next leaders that you did not attend.
I think a lot of people,
so don't give up.
Once they get to that position of leadership and investing in others and recognize the heartbreak that comes with it, they don't want to be leaders anymore. And they almost, with disdain, look on the new, younger guys who say, I want that, and they think, you don't know what you want. You don't know what you get into.
Right.
And what we're trying to do is warn you, not to say, don't be a leader.
Right.
But to go into it with your eyes wide open.
Right.
Biblical leadership is investing in others, and there will be people you invest in who will run from you, and God.
And that is the case. And sometimes building a relationship is take and give sometimes. It's the way it is. Try your best.
All right. Well, we're going to end tonight. Hopefully you can see us again next week as we continue our series on the 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership.